Why is Triple H on the Vengeance 2001 poster is a question that everybody asks when they see it. Because is he on the show? No. Is he even on general TV at the time? No, because he'd injured his quadricep and he was trying to rehab it and get back to win the game. And sure, if you were into the dirt sheets at the time, you knew what was going on. But otherwise, it just seemed like the World Wrestling Federation missed Hunter Hearst Helmsley so much they thought they'd put his picture up there on some promotional material so they could look at it going, man, we can't wait till your ass is back. And isn't that nice? Well, no, because that's not the case at all. Instead, the powers that be just crossed their fingers and hoped that Triple H would be ready, to the point they did indeed use him in this fashion. I mean, how ridiculous is that? That's like bowling with your eyes closed. Just open them, you'll do a better job. I mean, it's one of the most ridiculous things you've ever heard when it comes to wrestling, which isn't true because there was that one time when Kane electrocuted Shane McMahon's testicles, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. As it turned out, Triple H wouldn't return to the WWF for another month, and in hindsight, it wasn't the worst thing in the world because that reaction he got in Madison Square Garden, I tell you, it will make you feel tingly-tangly, and you're not even the one coming out in front of a crowd. There is a music video on the show that's all like, Triple H, here's the game, gonna come back real soon, but obviously that just left the fans in attendance livid because they wanted to see this person, and it pretty much pissed off everybody that had also ordered the pay-per-view. Whoops. That aside, the big thing obviously at Vengeance 2001 is that WWF did crown the first ever Undisputed Champion, kinda, if you want to look into it, you certainly can, and they picked Chris Jericho, and do not forget, that was a huge surprise, and actually would have been the start of building a new star if they had pushed him properly. And yes, we're going to talk about it. He was the definition of a transitional champion. It wasn't his fault. Nobody believed. It was also part of the plan to eventually split the brands, and I wonder what's going to happen to that down the line, which is why Vince McMahon and Ric Flair had become co-owners of the company after the WCW EC alliance had died. But this was pretty much a lock towards the end of 2001, and we were going to transition into that when 2002 came around. And obviously it begged the question, well, yeah, what are we going to do with all those WCW assets? And the answer was just like bury it 100 feet underground until a few years have passed, and then we can just make some documentaries out of it. In other random news bits at the time, Shawn Michaels was going to be on the WWF show known as Excess, and that sent everybody crazy. So, oh my God, he's going to come back to the ring, and you all know that story. And the WWE UK pay-per-view known as Insurrection, that was going to happen in the summer, sold out in 20 minutes. If you're now saying to yourself, that doesn't sound very exciting, Simon. No, this is what happens when your competition is dead. Anyway, enough of that. Let's take the finger of power and yes, let's up those downs for Vengeance 2001. Vince McMahon is out to kick things off at Vengeance, and within 2 minutes, he has said, let's get one thing straight. I would never kiss another man's ass, and in fact, there's no one man enough to make me kiss their ass. Alright, fine, if you've got to do it, it's early on, but we'll do it, roll it. Hello, my name is Simon Miller, and welcome to Out of Context Wrestling, this time, December 2001. And back in December 2001, Vince McMahon, the boss, the CEO, the runner, the owner of World Wrestling Federation, decided to show off his power. He would get his staff and his employees to kiss his ass. That's it. This is so weird for a pay-per-view as Vince goes on for ages talking about people's asses, and then Ric Flair comes out and says to McMahon, would you please stop talking about people's asses? This is generally what goes down. I'm just like spinning plates in my head. Why are we so focused on asses? I mean, you can't get too mad at it because the almost 11,000 strong crowd are just booing and chanting and yelling at Vince. So he's done something right. And of course, he is referencing to that moment on SmackDown when The Rock pretended that Vince was going to kiss Trish Stratus' ass and then knocked him out and made him kiss Rikishi's ass instead. I have never said the word ass this many times in my entire life. Thankfully, finally, the Nature Boy decides we should actually get things going and have a match, and it's a tag team bout between the brand new Too Cool, which was Scotty 2 Hotty, and Albert, wearing a brand new hat like he's Malibu Stacy, taking on Christian and taking on Tess. This is like all the teams had just been mixed up by accident. Is a down. It's not necessarily bad, but it's amazing this is on a pay-per-view because it just kind of feels like you're watching a random episode of Raw or a random episode of SmackDown. But once again, you have to give all the props in the world to Scotty 2 Hotty. He keeps teasing the worm here, and every time he does, the fans are just desperate to see it. So they really want to see Scotty's worm. And now that's come out of my mouth, I realized how... I don't want to talk about... Let's just move on. But yeah, honestly, when he finally does hit it, the fans react like Stone Cold Steve Austin's glass break music has just hit, and they can't believe it. It also leads to Albert hitting the Baldo bomb onto Christian, and I personally find that name offensive. And that's it. 1, 2, 3. This was absolutely pointless. William Regal was then cutting a promo, and this guy, he's so underrated. Up. With a wink of an eye, he's already told the coach that he thinks Americans are disgusting, and then stared at him and go, oh yeah, and you're also a silly little pillock. William Regal, man, simply the best. It was then Edge versus Will for the IC Championship, and Edge here comes out to his Never Gonna Stop Me Rob Zombie music. And I've wanted to say this, I guess for the past 20 years, it sucks. I like Rob Zombie, and this is okay as a song, but it doesn't work as entrance music, it doesn't get you off your feet, it doesn't get you excited, and even though I've just triggered all the comments, I'm standing by it, and you are gonna do it with the finger of power is getting it down. As for the match itself, well yeah, it's just alright, and it's certainly not bad, but you can see I'm not that excited, I'm not jumping around, I'm just stood here still like I'm a dead person. Talk about the Undertaker later. I suppose my expectations were so high, because William Regal and Edge, they're like bona fide Hall of Famers, and yeah, it was just alright, but we don't crap on alright, so he gets it up. Regal was obsessed with brass knucks at this time, which is why the referee checked him for about 4 hours before we got things going, and I just love stuff like that. It's all the small little touches, and then as we do kick things off, Jim Ross tells us that Edge is silky smooth. Now, I assume he was talking about his wrestling maneuvers, but it really does sound like a reference to his skin. The most interesting part with all of this is that at one stage, Regal was meant to win the Intercontinental Championship from Edge, because everybody behind the scenes had decided it was time to push Edge to the moon. But what they couldn't make their minds up is, well, is he going to become a bigger star if he is a champion or if he chases the belt? And obviously the former won out, because he did retain his championship after a spear. That all happened too because Regal was trying to cheat. He had the brass knucks in his pants and he was going to punch Edge in the head, but Edge was too smart. And look, I guess it's kind of fascinating to watch this back now, knowing the trajectories these two guys were going to take. But honestly, if it hadn't been on the card, I don't think anyone would have noticed. Ric Flair was then in the back, and it's that time again to remind you that I hate life. I hate what life is. He looks so youthful here. I mean, he looks younger than I do, and it just scares the absolute shit out of me because it comes from us all. We can't get away from it. I am going to look like an absolute buffoon when I'm an old man. Kurt Angle also then bursts in and starts yelling at the Nature Boy, telling him, look, there's 2 things that I've done that you have never done. 1, you ain't ever gonna be an Olympic gold medalist, and when this night is done, I will be the Undisputed Champion, and you never did that either. And Rick treats this like he's some kind of child, just like, yeah, Kurt, man, you go and do it. I don't care. I'm gonna go fly a limousine and probably go on a date with a chick. I don't care about you. And Angle, he then just leaves. But somehow, this is incredibly entertaining because when Ric Flair is on, Ric Flair is on. And as we know, Ric Flair always on. We also saw Lita getting dressed because she is going to be the special guest referee in the match between Matt Hardy and Jeff Hardy when Matt comes up to her. And every time I see this, because you know they're dating at this point, you're like, oh boy, I know what's going to happen in a few years' time. Maybe you should just live in this time period instead. Sheesh. Matt was also trying to blackmail her into siding with him later on in that fight, basically because, well, we're banging, so you should be on my side. I mean, what a terrible thing to do, and what a terrible thing to say. Right, we then did get to Matt versus Jeff, and let's make it very clear. These two are legends, these two are heroes, these two are fundamental to many of the aspects we consider when it comes to modern pro wrestling. But when they have a fight against each other, it's like this. See, I'm trying to collect my hands, and I'm just missing. And that's fine, but it just doesn't work as you want. And again, it's not rubbish or anything, but it just doesn't click. It didn't click 19 years ago. When I watched it again in 2020, it didn't click again. I just can't put my finger on it. I gotta give it a down. The fans are also really quiet throughout all of this, which gives it an eerie feel, and maybe our expectations were just too high. Matt is also teasing a heel turn here because he is fed up with Jeff, because every time they're about to win a match, his stupid brother does some kind of daredevil move, and that means they lose. And I was a bit like, well, I kind of side with Matt here, because he's not wrong. And as you would expect, Matt keeps trying to cheat here, but Lita catches him like, you've got to stop doing that, boy. But it's kind of nice because it does tie into the finish. Jeff Hardy hits the Swanton Bomb, he covers Matt, and at the 2 count, Matt puts his leg on the ropes, but Lita doesn't see it. Oh my gosh, she awards the pinfall and the victory to Jeff. And as you can imagine, Matt Hardy, he ain't happy at all. It also proves this is why you shouldn't have special guest referees in matches, because that's not Lita's job. She's not employed to do this, so of course she's gonna suck. And Matt just storms out of here being like, you two are an absolute pair of goons. And once again, he's not wrong. He got screwed over again. Later on, Matt and Lita also fall out backstage when Matt looks at her and just blows past her and leaves the arena. And once again, he probably should have just left for good. I'm gonna stop talking about it. And then, well, yeah, I mean, Trish Stratus knocks on The Rock's door and she said, oh man, what you did to Vince McMahon on SmackDown was amazing. Because I guess she likes seeing big Samoan guys kiss CEOs' asses. And she gives him a peck on the cheek. And then she goes to leave, but The Rock tells her to stay. And then basically, in a really creepy fashion, seduces her. The Rock, for some reason, also looks like a dinosaur during all of this. He's kind of got his shoulders back and he's kind of flicking his neck around like a velociraptor. And before he is done, he thrusts in her general direction. All of this was really bad. I think WWE then realized they had two back-to-back matches that went over 10 minutes. So they looked at the Dudley Boys, the tag team champions, and they looked at Kane and the Big Show, and I have no recollection of them being a team or going after the belts. Anyway, officials said to them, look, if you could do something really quick, we'd appreciate it, because we're worried the fans are getting bored. So within 5 minutes, this was over, down. And it all ends when Bubba Ray exposes the turnbuckle and him and Devon pick up the Big Show and throw his head into it. And Jim Ross and the King try and pretend like, oh, it's the 3D. It looks absolutely nothing like a 3D. It's basically a flapjack. And because the Big Show has a massive head, I suppose, he's knocked out. The Dudley Boys win. 1, 2, 3. Once again, pointless. You could never watch this and your life would be exactly the same as it is now. And the only good bit is that Stacy Keibler, who was managing the Dudleys at the time, just points at Kane afterwards and goes, ha 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 ha. That really made me chuckle. As did Jim Ross shouting, well, that wasn't very pretty. He understood too. Then it was another of these from the what the flub, when did this happen vault, because we were getting a hardcore title match between Rob Van Dam, and I'll give you a few seconds to think about it, and that's right, the flippin' Undertaker. And even more amazingly, is getting it up. The build to this was also absolutely hilarious because the Undertaker decided that he was gonna go heel, he was gonna go bad guy. So do you know how he got that across to the audience? He grabbed Jim Ross's head and he stuck it right into Vince McMahon's ass. So one, we're talking about asses again, but two, what kind of logic is that? I'm so mad at the fans and no one's giving me any respect. How can I get my revenge on the world? That's right, I can take a beloved commentator and stick it in someone's bum. It gets even better because as soon as the dead man's music hit, everybody starts to cheer, so the fans couldn't care less that JR had to go through this. But honestly, this is a really entertaining hardcore match. I mean, no one takes a beating quite like RVD. He will throw himself around for days. You can call me sports entertained. I don't think this was any attempt to try and get Rob Van Dam over either, because he gets absolutely mullered. I mean, he's being thrown around the stage, he's being thrown into weapons, he's being thrown on the floor, and to end it, he gets picked up on the stage and thrown through 2 tables. I mean, I honestly thought the man was dead. Rob did do this crazy dive off a balcony, which looked absolutely badass, but yeah, when all was said and done, we had a brand new hardcore champion, and it was The Undertaker, the man with a WrestleMania streak. That's kind of like him coming back now and being R-Truth for the 24/7 champion, and can you imagine Reddit if that happened? But like I say, even with all of that, this is a jolly good time. Taker comes across like an absolute maniac the whole time because he's going for this really intense heel. I thought this was the highlight of the show so far, and in many ways, the highlight overall. Who would have thunk it? Back to Flair's office now, where Chris Jericho also just bursts in, and he's yelling at the 16-time world champion too. And once more, Flair's like, look, I don't care. You can go on and on and on. I think I'm better than you. I just want to style and profile. He didn't say any of that, but that's basically what he was implying. As ever, however, at this point we came to the WWE Filler Match, which they still insist on doing today, and I just don't get it. Basically, if you don't know, once they think they've built the fans to a fever pitch, they then feel like they need to calm them down before they give them the main event. Never works. It's just like popping a balloon right in front of your face, and that's why Trish Stratus versus Jacqueline for the women's title stood no chance. Down. It's not their fault, but it barely goes 3 minutes, and then Trish just wins with a backslide. And it's kind of cool because you can see Stratus getting better as a wrestler here, but nothing you can take from this. If you blink or went to the toilet, you would miss it, or, in WWE's eyes, went to the merchandise stand. It's just stupid. We then had another video packaging remind you of all the ass kissing that had been going on, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be in my brain for days. And honestly, you'd come away from this thinking that the major prize within the WWF was having your ass kissed or kissing somebody's ass. Forget world titles, it doesn't matter. We also cut to Rikishi, who's in WWF New York. He's like, hey man, I'm really happy that I took Vince McMahon's ass and stuck it in my face. No, other way around, you know what I'm talking about. I didn't mean it. It's just stupid and it's just preposterous. And in 2001, it probably aged then, so in 2020, it's basically like a dead plant. One of the reasons that women's match we just talked about was put where it was though, is because WWE wanted to overload the back end of Vengeance 2001 and essentially have a mini tournament. Because not only were we going to have Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Kurt Angle for the WWF title, but we were having Chris Jericho versus The Rock for the WCW, now called the World Championship, of course, because WCW had died and ECW had died. So we had all these belts around the place. So what other resolution, what other solution than to have two of them and push them together? Almost like having one world champion makes more sense than two. Don't tell anyone. So we did indeed begin with the WWF title between Steve Austin and Kurt Angle, and it's just good. These two have such great chemistry, you can get into it like that, especially because Kurt the whole time was like, oh man, I'm gonna work on Steve Austin's leg. He is attacking it like white on rice. There was a massive tease that Angle was actually going to win after he hit Austin with the Angle slam and Stone Cold kicked out, but this was just a precursor to what was about to happen not only on this show, but for the next 19 years in WWE. Where you take the idea of a finishing move and you just flush it down the toilet. Anyway, Kurt did turn around. He got Stone Cold stunned. Austin pinned him for the 1-2-3. Not only does he retain his gold, but now he's going after the other one too. The question is, who is his opponent going to be? It's Chris Jericho. And Vengeance really picks up steam then too, because you move right into The Rock versus Chris Jericho. No, you don't. That's what you thought. Instead, we go to Trish Stratus's locker room, where she is stood there in a towel when Test bursts in and demands that he gets it on with her. I have no words for this, especially when Test went, once you have Test, you forget about the rest. This is genuinely one of the most horrendous segments I have ever forgotten about, and right now, there you go, I'm going to forget about it again. But before I do, it is getting a down. Now, in fact, you know what? Brown down. Then it is The Rock versus Jericho, thank goodness, and I tell you this, actually better than Austin versus Angle. Up. The wrestling is great, including a DDT through the announce table after Chris Jericho has reversed a rock bottom attempt, and when he does the same thing again after a people's elbow, I tell you, the crowd are going wild. Chris Jericho like a reversal submission machine. There was always going to be some gaga because one, this was WWF in 2001, but also we had to have some fallout, you know, from Vince McMahon having his face stuck into a Samoan's ass. So just as The Rock has this match won, out comes the boss, but this just makes the Great One so mad. So he goes to hit Chris Jericho with the most electrifying move in all of sports entertainment, the people's elbow, but halfway through he grabs McMahon, chucks him in the ring, punches him, turns around, and he still hits Chris Jericho with the elbow. I mean, it is ludicrous. The ref is also dead at this point because McMahon has killed him after just tapping him on the face. You know, they go down like a ton of bricks, and unfortunately all of this allows Chris Jericho to wham The Rock right in the testicles, and at that very moment, very handedly, the referee is back on his feet. He counts the 1-2-3, and I tell you, that was a massive surprise at the time. Nobody thought Chris Jericho was going to get to the final, and nobody thought Chris Jericho was going to win the damn thing. So at this moment, everybody was on tenterhooks. They were intrigued. The momentum then does roll on because we do get our main event straight away. And again, everyone was like, well, it's a little bit disappointing because obviously Austin's going to win. Austin is always going to win, but little did we know. Still, this fun up. I laughed out loud straight away because Angle appears from nowhere and just twonks Steve Austin right in the head with a steel chair. And just as you're recovering from that, The Rock is back and he hits Chris Jericho with a rock bottom. I mean, there are get out of jail free cards all over the place. This was an even bigger brawl than the previous encounter, and of course, we had to have another ref bump. I mean, the Attitude Era, man. I really hope these officials were asking for like quadruple pay. Jericho backs that up straight away because he then whams Austin right in the penis, and then also follows it up with one of the worst Stone Cold stunners I've ever seen. Why don't we talk about this more? Like, I get it's not Jericho's move, but this ain't good. And then it's just a mess. I mean, you're gonna have to try and keep up with me. My man is back out of here, because of course he is, and he has another referee, because the original referee is down. But this referee is the crooked Nick Patrick that gets in the ring and starts shouting to Jericho, cover him, cover him. However, Jericho isn't in position, so Nick Patrick just falls to the ring mat, so that Ric Flair can then come out, pull him out, and punch him in the face, and Vince McMahon is so mad about this, he looks at Rick and punches him in the face as well. It is exhausting. Steve then beats up McMahon for a while, uses his opportunity to wham Jericho right in his testicles, then puts him in the walls of Jericho, and even though Chris is tapping out, once again, there is no ref. And then Booker T turns up, I kid you not, I genuinely laughed. Booker T turns up and he hits Stone Cold Steve Austin right in the head with the world title. I mean, who booked this madness? Very conveniently, Earl Hebner is then back from the dead and McMahon throws him in the ring. He counts the 1, 2, 3, and yes, the first ever Undisputed Champion is Chris Jericho. But talking about going out of your way to not strap the rocket to Y2J's back, Austin could have come out the next night on Raw and gone, here is 72,000 reasons why I should be the champ, and every fan would have gone, he's right on every single one. You can kind of tell it was too much too because the crowd doesn't erupt for the finish at all. I think because they're trying to get it all in their brain, but they just can't keep up with it. And it should have been a risk. It should have been an exciting risk back in 2001, but we just didn't go through with it properly. And it would be years later before Chris Jericho was finally treated like a main event player. And remember WrestleMania 18? We'll talk about it when we get there. I will say this though, when you do get to those last 3 matches, there's still sort of an air of electricity in the air, probably because The Rock was here, and I still enjoyed seeing Jericho claim his first ever WWF title. For that major reason, overall, I'm giving it an up. Now don't forget to leave a comment below, and again, put the shows that you want to see, and whichever one gets the most upvotes goes into the poll next week. I get people tweeting me going, oh Simon, you're ignoring my choice. I don't ignore anything. I go by what you guys say, and I'm happy to do it. Then like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, head over to WhatCulture.com where you can read yourself some articles, follow WhatCulture on Twitter, WhatCulture WWE, stay up to date with wrestling, and watch more videos here on WhatCulture Wrestling. Just click. My name is Simon from WhatCulture. Thank you for joining me as always, and I'll see you next Friday, 2 p.m. BST, when we up those downs for a retro show.